Today, we're talking about how to build a community and then how to use the members in that community to really create and foster connections and a network and really fuel your business. My guest today is Chris Yates. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, and I'm the host of this show. And every week I talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of different companies. We've had Netflix and Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, Grubhub, Redfin. Go check out the archives. Lots of great episodes for you to check out there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25 and Podcast Copilot, our platform for helping B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And super excited to have my guest here today, who I've known for quite a while. We've even hung out in person very briefly. Chris, I don't know if you remember that. We ran into each other. We were both in Las Vegas, I believe it was. He's the founder of Rhodium Network. It's a community and events platform for digital entrepreneurs. Been around for, I want to say about 10 or 12 years now, and facilitated a lot of different business deals, partnerships, connections among its members. And classic case of Chris just wanted to scratch his own itch. He was living in not a big urban area on the coast. He was living in Montana, wanted to connect with other digital entrepreneurs, and took matters into his own hands and created something that has been really thriving and helped him to even buy and build and sell a business within that community. So we're going to talk about that as well. Chris, great to have you here today. And I love to ask people about what they were like as a kid. And you grew up in a bit of an entrepreneurial family. Your father actually had a publishing business pre-internet, selling genealogical research, and even had some brick and mortar businesses. So you had that to look up to as a kid. What was that like growing up in that entrepreneurial community?
Yeah, I mean, one funny thing that I think about, just as a small anecdote, is this was well before we had cell phones, and the phone would ring, right? And so I was instructed by my father to answer the phone Yates Publishing, because that was his business name. So our
the
whole
home phone, you're the home phone every time.
Our home phone.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing when you're in high school and you have to do that.
And then, as I, he was great in that he would let me like break his computers and things as I'd play, video games or like try to learn things or play on AOL Instant Messenger or whatever. And I remember the dial-up internet line also was connected to our home phone. So I'd be trying to use the internet, and when somebody would call, I'd get kicked off, and he'd get mad because what if it was a client trying to call? So anyway, yeah, that was just like a fun anecdote. But yeah, so he built a kind of a cool, like unique business at the time. It was sort of like ancestry.com, but with paper. So I used to help him make copies of these things called family group sheets. So if your last name is Corcoran, you could call up my dad and say, hey, can I get all your research that you have on the Corcoran family? And, his son, who's, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, is on the copy machine making copies of those, and he'd pack those up, ship them out to you. And that would help you kind of build out your family tree. So I was exposed to, I would call it self-employment pretty young. I mean, he didn't have like a big team or anything like that, but it was always, he was always working that business while I was around, and integrated the life of his family with his businesses.
How did he get into that niche? He was just interested in it, or how did he have the research to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, at one point in his life, he's no longer, he doesn't practice this, but at one point he was part of the Mormon/LDS religion. And so that's a really big part. He lived in like the Salt Lake area, and that's one of the biggest areas for this kind of like world. So I think I don't actually know exactly how it all started, but I know that was his own personal passion, that he was working on that for his own family research. And then, somehow came up with the idea that, man, this could probably be a lot easier. And so he built this process called the Family Group Sheet Exchange, where he'd get other researchers to connect with each other, share their research with one another. And he kind of like developed a standard template and format for that. So now you have, the ancestry.coms and those types of things that sort of take that for you. But he was really, I think, a pioneer in that way.
It's actually a really good lesson, because he didn't start serving everyone in the entire country. He started with a very specific, narrow little niche, and then expanded from there, didn't he?
Yeah. As far as I know, yeah. I mean, I was so young that it was before my time, but
Yeah. And so naturally, for someone who has a pre-ancestry.com genealogical research business, the next natural step is opening a Taekwondo studio, right? So
yeah.
how did that come about?
Yeah, so he was doing Taekwondo and like some of myself and my other parts of my, I mean, I did Taekwondo from the age of like 5 to about 16. And so when we moved to Montana from where we originally grew up in Missouri, I think it was just an opportunity for him to, he had already achieved black belt. And so he was like qualified to be a teacher. And so he started a little studio there where we lived in Montana. And I was still practicing under him, and we built up students and stuff. And eventually I got to the point where I was like teaching the classes for him and getting paid to do that, and sort of almost running the studio at the age of 15, 16, something like that. So yeah, and it's just lots of different little, and he had a antique shop as well. So I used to mind the shop when he wasn't there. So yeah, just kind of multiple businesses happening all around the place.
Wow. And you got eventually into designing and creating websites, building websites for people, and take us through that. How did that come about?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I messed around on the computer quite a bit, and at the time I taught myself HTML, which is the programming language to build websites. And I think like many, I think young kids maybe of my age, video games sort of translated really well into these kinds of things like building websites and other things like that. Just because I was playing one game where you kind of like you end up having like a website if you want to build like a special map for this game or something like that. So you had to build your own website to put that out there, publish it around the internet. So it was sort of like this logical path that I started getting into this kind of stuff. And I would have like family friends or my friends' parents who had websites that they wanted to build, and they heard I was like technically savvy. So they would hire me to do that just kind of through word of mouth. And eventually ended up, saving up enough money to buy my own PC and stop breaking my dad's stuff. And, I still remember the story when I went to buy that PC. I went to local Best Buy equivalent. It wasn't called Best Buy at the time. And I was standing there for like half an hour waiting for somebody to help me because I was ready to buy a PC and I had a handful of cash. But I was so young, they didn't even realize that like that's what I was wanting to do. So finally, I just walked up to somebody and said, "Hey, I want to buy this computer. Can you help me?" Nobody's
Slap
here.
the cash down on the counter kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's a classic story though. Like you're too young to even buy a computer. They don't even take you seriously. And
Exactly.
You're already making enough money to buy yourself a computer. That's great. And so that it seems like that kind of naturally evolved. You get to college and you started a couple of different initiatives with friends, roommates, doormates, doing digital marketing businesses and website hosting. Any memories from that particular period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first experience within this space and kind of like, let's say the .com space. So if you put this in a time window, we're in those like late 90s where everybody was like, it was all about Yahoo and these portals and like, hey, yeah, we're going to put banner ads and make millions and millions of dollars. And so
Right.
I had a friend who'd sort of initiated a extreme sports media brand portal thing, and they needed somebody to code the back end of the website. And I was in computer science and had met them through that and all that. So they kind of brought me on as a team member of theirs. And so that was really cool because like there were days where we were out filming like the local whitewater kayakers who were like professional, semi-professional in our area there in Missoula, Montana. And then, we would go back at night and code and the website to put those videos up and edit them and things like that. And
that was no
it's really
easy
cool.
task back in those days.
Yeah, it
You
wasn't as
graduated
easy
from
as now.
college in 2003. So we're talking 99 to 2003 time period here. Not an
Yeah,
easy
something
thing
like
to
that.
get video on the web at that time.
Not really. No, we
Yeah.
actually had real cameras instead of just phones we could point and click. So
You got to upload the file and wait for it to, all that kind of stuff. A lot of work. Yeah. And so after college, you're still living in Montana, and do you immediately go to work for yourself doing digital marketing and building websites for people?
Yeah. So during college with the original two founders of that media portal thing that didn't really work out because then around 2000 or so, like that whole industry kind of crashed and burned after the
advertising
collapse.
model did kind of collapsed as well at that
Yeah,
time.
but we came together with a few other people and built like a design and hosting company for websites and stuff like that. And so, but what happened was graduated from college, like we weren't making enough money from that to support me as a, full-time gig. So I ended up moving to Vegas and got hired on as like the first hire for a digital marketing or a business and in their digital marketing kind of or marketing department in general. So the founder was doing their marketing, and so I was like his first hire into actually doing the marketing so that he could not have to do all the marketing himself. So that was my first job out of college, and then I eventually sold my shares in that hosting company and stuff. And yeah, so that's kind of how I made the transition from college to my first job.
And then at some point you make it back to Montana. And then what was the impetus behind starting the Rhodium Network?
Yeah, so that first job, the boss that I had there, he and I built a really good kind of mentorship relationship, and so we actually decided to do business together. And several years later, fast forward, he ended up selling the business I used to work with him on, and he came back to me and said, "Hey, Chris, let's do something together." And so we started buying online businesses together. And
let me pause there. So now we have Flippa, we have all these different databases, we have your community, but there's nothing back then. And I imagine in this time period, some people are even questioning the wisdom of buying businesses. What types of where are you finding online businesses to buy, and what types of online businesses are you buying?
Yeah, so at the time there were either forums of essentially, like they were kind of like webmaster sort of like internet business owner sort of forums where they would have a classified section to those forums where people would buy and sell their website. Business. So that was one place. Like Digital Point was a big one at the time. Flippa, actually, you mentioned them. This was early days for them. So this was like 2009, 2010. So they were actually at the time, and I don't think this is necessarily the case anymore at all, but they were kind of the 800-pound gorilla of the place. It was like the eBay for buying and selling websites. So that was where we also started buying some early stuff. And so, yeah, it was pretty, somewhat, I would say, like Wild West at the time. There were a lot of scams and all sorts of things like that at the time. So yeah, that was how we started finding those first few deals.
Yeah. And did you, like, with your computer science background, did you pour your energy into, improving it, improving SEO? What sorts of things did you do to add value to these businesses?
Yeah. So, well, just to bridge the gap of when I said fast forward, I actually started a digital marketing agency. So I was helping a bunch of smaller companies with their digital marketing, pay-per-click, SEO, all of those, the traffic driving strategies you can use, as well as improving like conversion on websites and things like that. So I had all this knowledge and had never applied it to my own assets. So this was an opportunity to do that with these sites we were buying. So we would, like in a perfect world, what we would look for is a business or a website that had really strong quality traffic that was just under monetized. So it's way easier to take something that already has traffic and then increase the average revenue per visitor to that website through better monetization strategies. A simple example might be all they had was one little banner ad in the bottom left corner of their website that nobody really sees and doesn't get very many displays. If we can flip that to maybe an affiliate program or partnering with a brand who wants to get exposure to that audience, who would pay 5 or 10 times that amount for the exact same traffic that they're generating already, we make 10 times the amount from the same traffic, and thus the value of that actual asset, the business itself, because businesses are typically valued on a revenue or a profit multiple, would go up by a similar amount. So that was kind of the idea. We'd buy under monetized stuff, improve the monetization, and hold it or flip it.
And did you have any big wins that you can recall from that time period?
Yeah, early days. I mean, you could buy these things for like less than 1 year's earnings, which is kind of crazy. Nowadays, that's not the case. Usually it's more like, 3 or 4 or whatever, 2 to 4, let's say, typically on profit of the annual profits. So yeah, I mean, we were getting. I mean, I don't think this is the case today and wouldn't be the case today, but we were getting like triple digit annualized returns when we were doing this in the early days through this strategy.
Wow. And how about big setbacks? Because I know there's a lot of like Google updates and things like that killed people's traffic, or maybe founder that disappears or servers that crash? Any big setbacks or challenges during this time period?
Yeah, for sure. So we had an investor who was interested in what we were doing, gave us a really good valuation to put in like a chunk of money and also give us like essentially a debt line. And so we did our first, I think, like bigger sort of six-figure deal at the time. And I think it was probably about 3 or 4 months later, for those who remember Google Penguin, an algorithm change that Google made relating to backlink issues. Like that particular website got hit really bad, like 70% within a couple day period where that traffic dropped, and revenue went right down with it because we didn't really know. Like number one, we didn't do really good due diligence because we didn't really know any better. And then number two was the website was set up to where if it wasn't getting new traffic, it wasn't making any money. So it was all built around new traffic. So that was like learn a lot of good lessons about that on that particular one. I was able to change the model of that business and kind of get it turned around. But that was definitely a painful, like a learning opportunity, let's say.
A few sleepless nights, I imagine, during that
Right.
time period over that one. Okay, so let's flash forward to Rhodium. We were originally called Rhodium Weekend. Did this start as like a meetup that you were doing in Montana?
No, actually. So my old business partner that I mentioned had experience running events and those kinds of things. And so the idea was, hey, let's find other people who were doing what we were doing. Because it's hard to find these people, like, and why there's no like industry event for people who are interested in, acquiring businesses, operating them as portfolios, exiting them, all those kinds of things. So he lived in Vegas. So we did the first event at the Wynn in Las Vegas, which is a nice resort there. Happened to have a local connection who was able to hook us up a little bit to be able to get a conference room at a reasonable rate. Still was expensive. And funnily enough, we had bought a training program that somebody else had built around teaching people how to buy and sell online businesses. So we had this list that we had acquired as part of that acquisition. So we were able to promote this as an event to that list, plus the network we'd built, doing this stuff ourselves. And the idea was, let's teach people what we're doing, and maybe we'll get, some benefits as being like a connector in the industry, like deals we might not see. And then we get to learn from some other people and what they're doing. So that was kind of the impetus of it. And so the first event was in 2012, ended up with maybe like 20, 30 people there, small room.
You happy with that or?
Space. I mean, we maybe got close to breaking even, but yeah, like
first events are always so stressful.
Yeah, I always say like the first event's always going to suck. The second event's still going to suck. By the third iteration, if it's not starting to feel a little bit better, then something's wrong. So
yeah. And so at what point did it start to did it evolve into becoming more of a community rather than just an event that you do once a year?
Yeah, I think couple things there. So one is we really listened to people who showed up, and when you get a small group of people in a room who tended to be a higher level entrepreneurial person, we didn't really realize it, but it's kind of a byproduct. If somebody's interested in buying businesses and that kind of stuff, they're probably going to be at least savvy, in some degree. So, and that's kind of who we're targeting, is not necessarily like the business opportunity, is more like, actual entrepreneurial experience, business owners, things like that. So when you get a small group of people and, you get them talking to one another and things like that, we really started hearing feedback that, hey, I love the fact that there's so many great people here, and we create this environment where we're all kind of sharing with one another. So we kind of listened to that feedback we were getting at that first event, and sort of similar feedback over the years. At some point, I ended up buying out my old business partner, and I didn't have any interest. I'm much more of an introvert. I don't like to be the guy who's, up on the stage performing for people and training people and anything like that. So to make my job easier and to kind of run this thing in a way where it really fit my skill set and my personality well, was where I got to shine the light on other members doing interesting things in the community and sort of get two people talking to each other, so I didn't have to talk, right? And so that really, I think probably like 2014, 2015 was really when I really started to lean in heavily to the community aspect of it.
And it's interesting because that was probably a smart business decision, especially for something that happened in 2020, but also reflected your personality and your specific interests in running that community.
Yeah, and one other point I didn't make, which I think is also important, is, and this relates to listening to the feedback from members, but also seeing behavior over time. So if you like you take an event or a conference or really any business, let's say that there's two flavors of this. One is people come once and you never see them again, and then the other flavor is people come once, they love it, and they come back every year. I would much rather have the latter of those two. And what I started to realize is the acquisition side of things, if that's what the brand was really known for, those people tended to be higher churn. And people don't typically do acquisitions like every month or even every year. Like they'll do one maybe every few years or 5 years. And after they did an acquisition, now they're in this operating mode and they sort of churn out of the event because they feel like, oh, this is about buying businesses. I'm not buying right now, so this isn't relevant. I'm not going to come again. So having the flexibility to go a little bit more broad and upmarket with the brand was also a key decision as well.
Now, another thing I want to ask you about is, you grew up in an entrepreneurial household. You're an entrepreneurial guy. The traditional model of people that are buying and selling businesses is like an M&A broker, but you never pursued that model, did you? You kind of monetized this community based on buying a ticket once a year to an event.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I always had, I guess, there was something in me that felt like being a broker felt like being a car salesman, and it felt like it would taint the purity of this community where everybody felt like I have this ulterior motive to try to do a deal or sell them some deal I'm trying to sell or something like that. And yes, there were a lot of people who did very, very well with brokering along the way, but there really wasn't, I didn't feel like there was like more of a pure community that was more unbiased. And so that was one of the, I guess, strategic decisions of not going down the brokering route. We definitely support and love a lot of the brokers in the industry and have been able to send a lot of business to them and vice versa and stuff. So that's been a key, definitely a key partnership over the years. But in order for us to do that well, we realized that, didn't make sense for us to be the brokers. Instead, let's fill this niche that we're in.
And talk about some of the members of the community and some successes that you've seen through that. A couple of my past guests on my podcast, Bjork and Lindsay Ostrom from the Pinch of Yum community, Walker Dybal, or I think you said Dybal.
Sure.
I always say it wrong. Of the Buy Then Build community. So you've had a couple of people like that have gotten some real successes through the community.
Yeah, I mean, so going back, like one of the early ones, this was 2013. So this was the second year of hosting the annual event. Two guys ended up at Taco Bell in the middle of the night together, because one had heard that one's considering selling his business.
Yeah, naturally, Taco Bell late night where all the big deals are done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I don't know if you've ever interviewed him, but if you've interviewed anybody from Quiet Light, I'm guessing you have. But
they are a client of ours, actually. Yeah, we do their podcast. Yeah,
awesome. Yeah. So one of their brokers, I guess he's now in a leadership position. Chuck Mullins, before he ever became a broker, came to the 2013 event, and another member of the community, Jason Glaspie, was looking to sell his business, and they ended up putting a deal together in 2013 just by meeting and connecting at that event. So I saw like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I get to smash these people together and cool things tend to happen. And so I started to track these deals as they went over the years. And at some point it hit like $100 million in these deals that had happened from people meeting in the community. And I since stopped even trying to track it, just because it, when you get to multiple hundreds of millions, it starts getting really difficult.
It's probably over $1 billion now.
I have no idea, but yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's definitely like, you get people who are thinking this way together, and cool things can happen. We've also had business partnerships. So there's a couple guys in the community who have bought I want to say like 5 businesses together. They met through Rhodium, and they ended up starting a warehouse third-party logistics company together to run their businesses that they had bought together. And they built I think a multiple 7-figure portfolio of e-commerce businesses by now as a result of that. Had a couple of people get married from meeting at one of my events. So it's so
Nice.
cool. Like I always say, like, man, what a great business to be in when you feel like you would do this for free, but you still get paid for it. So
Yeah, that is the coolest feeling. I've had a couple of people who I introduced through the podcast who started a business together, and one moved to another city so they could move together and start a business together. Another two guys that we introduced became fast friends. Their families went on vacations together. One of them ended up moving from California to Puerto Rico, and then talked the other one to move his family to Puerto Rico. Also, it's so cool. It's just neat seeing that sort of thing.
oh, yeah.
So you're seeing some concrete results from all these different members of the community getting together, building businesses together, starting businesses, things along those lines. And you ended up acquiring a Centurica, which is a business that does due diligence. And then you built it up with a member of that community, with the assistance of a member of the community, and you ended up selling it to another member of the community. So talk us through that one.
Yeah. So 2015, I'd been running this event annually for, I guess, 3 or 4 years. And there was one of the attendees slash speakers who was the original founder of Centurica. He approached me and said, Chris, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. I want to build like a SaaS company and grow it to $1 billion. And there's like 2 people in the world I'd sell this business to, and you're one of them. So would you want to do a deal on this? So we ended up doing a deal. And if you think about it, like, Rhodium certainly was known for the buying and the selling and the operating of these businesses. And what he was providing was essentially risk reduction when you're acquiring these online businesses. And so sort of like in a real estate deal, you always hire a property inspector to check it out, make sure you don't have any leaky pipes or whatever. So that this business was doing essentially the same thing. And it wasn't brokering, because we touched on that. It was much more of more of like an agency, a service business, where we were providing a really good service that, to help reduce risk for people, and made a lot of sense for both businesses to benefit. Rhodium would benefit because the clients of Centurica could potentially come out and do the event thing and all that. And then the credibility that I had as already being in the industry and operating this event and being a connector and things like that helped Centurica's brand as well, like me being at the helm of that. So I acquired that in 2015. Actually, that year, just before the event I hosted, I knew I was going to be buying it, and there was another member of the community, Brian, who was going to be there, and I was thinking about him as like, I need to hire somebody to help me actually do these reports, because they're kind of like the end product is like almost like a Carfax report on a business, right?
Yeah.
So
Similarities, by the way, to your father's business as a kid. Like, you produce a report for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many funny things when you look back at the connections over the years. But yeah, so Brian was a member of the community already, and I kind of sat down with him at breakfast one day and said, "Hey, I'm buying Centurica, and he interested in going in on this." And he started out as a contractor, ended up eventually buying in as a partner in the business, and together we grew that thing to over 7 figures a year in profit. And ended up selling it to a third member of the community. His name's Nate Ginsberg. And if you've ever heard of a brand called Sellerplex and a couple other brands that he has, he'd already been kind of in the space and had been doing some due diligence and stuff like that. So in a way, he was a bit of a competitor, an up and coming competitor. But he ended up approaching us to say, "Hey, you interested in selling Centurica?" So we did a deal. So yeah, bought it from a Rhodium member, partnered with a Rhodium member to grow it, and then sold it to a third.
Amazing. So at that point in time, did you view it as Rhodium was kind of the business that supported Centurica as your main business? Because over 7 figures in profit is pretty darn good, and we rarely see that in the event space unless it's a huge business.
Yeah, no, Rhodium, I've always kept it more like, I think of it like you have indie music and you have indie movies and stuff. I think of Rhodium as much more of like an indie event, indie community. And we're not trying to be a really big, or at least I'm not trying to make it a really big thing. Like, it's really much more of a, more of a lifestyle, like craft. I see it as kind of my craft, where allows me to make an impact on people, pays for itself, pays for some of our living expenses. And then I can make bigger plays like Centurica, while still, operating Rhodium as kind of the through line through that. And there's a lot of benefits to having community around you. Like, there were a lot of times where people in the Rhodium community would tell me, Chris, you need to raise prices for Centurica. Chris, you need to raise prices for Centurica. Took me a while to do it, and I kicked myself that it took me so long. But after doing it, I grew the business by about 500% over about 5 months once I introduced a higher price point offering.
People tell you to raise your prices. You got to listen to them eventually, right? Even if we're resistant sometimes.
Exactly.
Okay, so I love to ask people, especially that have an event business, what 2020 was like, because now I know your Rhodium Summit is this year. It's in October of 2024. Was the 2020 event, was it in October?
Yep.
Okay, so you had 8 or 9 months warning, which probably was a little helpful. But what was it like for you in February, March of 2020 when you started hearing about this COVID unfolding and you think, oh crap, this is going to really affect my business?
Yeah, John, we don't want to think about these things very much. But no,
no, we certainly don't.
Well,
I'll painful memories.
There's a couple things I'll mention. So I feel like I took the COVID thing a little bit more in stride, but this is kind of a sad story. But I remember we were hosting our event like a year or two earlier at the Mandalay Bay, and this was just after that really bad mass shooting that occurred.
Oh, wow, you were at the same hotel that the shooting occurred. Wow.
Yeah,
so I imagine you were locked into a contract and you couldn't move it.
Yeah, wow. and like it was still, a couple months away, but I remember that day because like I heard about the news in the morning and like I was getting my kid ready for school. I sat down next to him. I just like started crying. I'm like, man, like for a lot of reasons, like part of it was like, God, this is such a horrible situation, but shit, like what happens if I can't, like people don't want to be at the Mandalay Bay, like they're scared to be there or something like that. Like, what does that mean to me? So so it was sort of like almost in a way that was priming the pump for future, like, and I'm laughing just because it's like, not because of the situation that occurred, but just like the fact that like, in a way I felt like it's good that I had been through a tough time like that previously because COVID was very difficult, in the event space. A lot of businesses didn't come out of the other end of it. Yeah. And so I realized that, so number one is I had Centurica from a financial perspective that was, more than supporting me at the time.
And that probably got busier, I imagine, because there were a lot of deals that were done in 2020 and 2021.
Yep. Digital businesses became more and more high. And like one of the big things that helped Centurica is there were some e-commerce like aggregator roll-up companies that really started to grow during that time. And COVID was really benefiting them. So there was like this big wave that occurred in the e-commerce space that Centurica benefited from. So luckily enough, I had, this is a benefit of having a portfolio of businesses is, sometimes seasonality or, macro events can negatively impact one, while it could potentially, you might have another one that you're lucky enough that it's negatively correlated. So you get a benefit from it on the other side. So that's probably like, one of the reasons why I wasn't totally freaking out. But every year prior to that, I'd always done a 1-year contract with my venues. But before I knew anything about what was going to happen in 2020, I signed a 2-year agreement for the first time with the Waldorf Astoria. And this was, this is a more expensive, like higher end hotel because I was going a little bit more up market over the years and improving Rhodium. And so I had just signed that contract and then realizing that, man, what's going to happen here. And luckily enough, like, the venues were pretty understanding. They were able to essentially just say, hey, look, let's just push it out. We're not going to like let you out of the contract, but we're not going to make you pay the entire year's agreement. Because in events, you actually end up guaranteeing not only the food and beverage minimum, the space, but also people don't realize this, you're guaranteeing all the attendee hotel room revenue.
Yeah, that's actually, personally, when we did events, that was the most stressful part about it because especially with the rise of Airbnb, people like staying other places or in Las Vegas, there's other hotels around. So people like look at prices at other places. And so you're like, please stay at our hotel.
Exactly. So I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that, and potentially no revenue in that business. So I can see how some of these bigger events would have really struggled. But so we were able to pivot to what became Rhodium Remote. So the mindset I had at the time, and I feel like I should go back and listen. I did a few podcasts after this, interviews where people interviewed me about how I did this. But I thought about this like, okay, let's go to first principles here. What is an actual in-person conference? It's two humans sitting next to each other, First principles, they're using their voice to communicate. They might shake hands and things like that. So if you take that experience to, like, let's say Zoom as an example, first principles, what can we replicate? So voice, that's easy enough. Yeah, we can't do touch. Maybe we're missing some smells. But at the end of the day, it's that connection you get and things like that. So I took first principles of an in-person event and applied it to Zoom. So I did a lot with like breakout sessions, matchmaking, bringing in special guests, and actually doing like a multi-day event as part of that through Zoom, in a way that wasn't just what everybody else was doing, which was typically they'd pre-record a bunch of content and they just have like this conveyor belt of speakers. So I tried to make the platforms, I try to use them for what they could do well. So as a simple example of this, on Zoom, okay, if a presenter is on stage at a conference and they're doing a screen share live of a website, you can't see it. It's like really hard to see on that projector. But if you're on Zoom, it's almost like you're looking over their shoulder at exactly what they're doing. So I leaned into some of those kinds of things. But anyway, long story short on that is I did a kind of a kickoff event, had Derek Sivers as a special surprise guest on that. And
I think he's in Australia or something like that, or maybe he hadn't moved there yet. But sometimes you can get even bigger speakers because they don't have to travel as far.
Yeah, that's a great point. New Zealand, yeah. And what we did with that was we raised a bunch of money through a charity, and because he's not real money oriented. He's made plenty of money and doesn't really care too much about money. So instead I said, hey man, if we do something together, like I'll help save some lives. And so we ended up donating to a couple of charities that did like mosquito netting and malaria prevention and things like that actually you can figure out about, I think it's like $3,000. Every $3,000 you donate, you end up saving a life. So we were able to save multiple lives, by doing that with him. Anyway, but I ended up launching a membership, which is essentially putting people into mastermind groups and putting facilitators in place to help them run their sessions and things like that. And that became a continuity, a recurring revenue component to Rhodium that I'm still doing today. And so, I realized that having a business that all its revenue was generated on, a 3-day period and an in-person event, I woke up and realized, hey, that's not the most anti-fragile business model. So started having Rhodium Remote, and that's been great for the community because it gives people an opportunity to connect on a deeper level between the in-person events.
Yeah. So you end up selling Centurica, as you mentioned earlier, to another business owner. Things have come back now. We're recording this in 2024, so we're back in person. You've got an event coming up in October. What else are you excited about? What else, are you looking to the future now that you've sold Centurica and Rhodium, now rebranded as Rhodium Network from Rhodium Weekend is your primary focus?
Yeah, well, I'm excited that I picked up a 3letter.com. I've been looking for the right domain name for a while to rebrand Rhodium, and I ended up picking up rhn.com. So that was super exciting for me. It's maybe it's an ego thing, but I do feel like it's long term, it will be a good investment. But yeah, so there's a few things I'm excited about. So number one is I host, as part of the Rhodium Remote membership, a retreat. So cool thing I get to do for the community, for usually it's around 50 people that we do this with, is I'll rent out like an all-inclusive resort, and we'll all get together for 5 or 6 days. So next Friday, I'm leaving to go to an area just south of Cancun, Mexico, beachfront, where we'll be together for several days. Last year we did Costa Rica. So that's been like, of the event stuff that I do, that's one of my favorite things. It's a lot less stressful than all the things that go into a typical conference where you have speakers and venues and that are a little different. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about leveraging AI for matchmaking as well. Big part of what I do in Rhodium is connect people, right? And so I've always thought, man, if I could just take my brain and turn it into a system that will say, hey, what are 3 people, if I could just type in, hey, who are 3 people John Corcoran should meet right now based on his goals of XYZ, and it just spits it out for me and then makes the intros and all that kind of stuff. I'm super stoked about that. So
I would buy that. That's a pain point for me, for sure. I love making introductions, but it is a bit of a pain to try and keep track of all the different ones that you could do.
Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of Dunbar's number, but you can, like, humans are actually wired to roughly be able to manage about 150 connections in their brain of humans. When you have a community like mine of 1,000, it's almost impossible to do that, right? So you tend to work with the people who are most engaged at the smaller part of it, and you miss this whole 800 or so people that are also amazing humans that you would love to support and connect and all that. And you just forget, you can't keep that all in your brain. So I don't know that I'll productize it, but it's something I want to do for Rhodium. And so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I love the idea of that because I'm the same way. I mean, Jeremy, my business partner, and I, who just interviewed you recently, he's the same way. We both do over 100 interviews a year of different people. We love introducing them. I think personally, the best way to get introductions is to make introductions. Hundreds of different podcast episodes that we're doing every month for clients. So it's a real challenge. There's not really a great way. There's not an elegant solution for that, in spite of all the different elegant solutions that have been created over the years in the digital space.
And just real quick, I want to mention what really made this real for me. Last year, we had a gentleman named Andrew Amon from 923 Digital who did a presentation about how they've been building AI software for like Fortune 500 companies, and like exactly they were using something called RAG, which you can search RAG AI and you'll learn all about that, retrieval augmented, whatever, blah blah blah. Point is he actually mapped out exactly how this would work, utilizing some of these new amazing tools of GPT and all this OpenAI and all that kind of stuff. And so it actually is like really possible right now. And you layer that onto the transcripts that you have of all your podcasts, you can dump all those transcripts into this database and just tag them with the person. And now the expertise of every single person. And maybe even, if somebody asks you like, hey, I need somebody who, I don't know, like who do you know in the agency space who does, compliance with privacy in California? Maybe you've got a podcast that you did 6 months ago, you totally forgot about, but you search in there. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that. It's really possible.
I totally agree. There's going to be those sorts of solutions going to be coming out. I'm excited about that because I've been doing a podcast for 14 years. I've got a lot of past stuff that I've forgotten about, that could be relevant. And I think that's going to extract some of that past value for people going forward in the future. Well, Chris, this has been great. We're going to wrap up. I love to ask people, and usually I warn them beforehand, which I forgot to warn you beforehand. So tough luck. You're going to have to wing it. But I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude to those who helped you along the way. And you've mentioned some names of some people that helped you along the way. You mentioned, various different business partners, members of your community, advocates, champions, that sort of thing. Sometimes people mention their family. That's cool, but I love to especially hear, like, are there any members of your community? Are there, key advocates who've been supporters of yours who you would just want to, thank and shout out for being there for you over the years?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So number one, David Gass, the person who hired me in that first job out of college. Currently, he is the CEO of a great organization that helps entrepreneurs with, especially real estate investors, with estate planning and tax strategies and things like that, called Anderson Advisors. Number two, I would say Jason Glaspie and Chuck Mullins, who I mentioned from already in this podcast. Like they're the kind of the OGs of Rhodium for certainly. Mike Nunez, MikeNunez.com. He's awesome. He used to operate, before he sold it, a business called Affiliate Manager, as well as building up a pretty amazing portfolio of e-commerce businesses, including one called Outdoor Play. But there's been a few people that consistently in Rhodium, I hear from other members that they made a huge impact on them. And Mike Nunez's name continuously comes up as like, he gave me this, like, actually there's one guy I'll mention who he runs a YouTube channel. Mike gave him one tip, and apparently he grew his business by like, I don't know, it was like some crazy amount. Like it was at like 5,000 and now he's doing like 60 or 70,000 a month or something like that. So just from that one little tip. So anyway, yeah, those are a few off the top of my head.
That's awesome. Chris, where can people go to connect with you, learn more about the Rhodium Network?
Yeah, I mean, rhn.com, I'm proud to say, is the place to go. The way I do it is I actually interview everybody before inviting them into the community. So if you think this is something you want to explore, you can actually, as part of the application process, you'll get on a call with me. So even if you're not, I love connecting with other entrepreneurs like you do, John. So happy to chat with anybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.